Welcome back to the Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics in the state legislature. I am your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover, and very happy to have back on the program Chris Micheli, an advocate for Snodgrass and Micheli, also an adjunct professor at McGeorge School of Law, and an author. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Yeah, thanks for coming back on in such a busy week. I know you got a lot going on this week. So
well, and this is exciting to be in your new facility.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we got the new studio
cool
going
setup.
here. Yeah, and excited to have you back. We're going to do a shorter episode, slightly shorter today, just because of the craziness going on with the House of Origin deadline, which we'll get to in a second. But before we do, we are obviously closing in on the budget, eventually going to be breaking for summer recess. Do you have any summer plans once we're out of the legislative cycle for the summer?
Yes, we're trying to take a family trip to Sicily and perhaps France.
Oh my gosh.
Trying to finalize those. Yeah.
That's awesome. Is that in July, like when we're on break?
Yes. Oh, definitely during break. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
When the kids were growing up, they're all young adults now, but when they were growing up, they never had a summer vacation. We always waited until generally
the fall, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, then they were back in school and they had all their activities. So really it was Christmas break.
Yeah.
And we really enjoyed like visiting my relatives in Italy in December. The holidays in places like Italy and France are just beautiful. And it's a lot of fun at that time. But now that we have a true summer recess, since the budget gets done, we can actually plan for and take some summer vacations. So.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
No, it's, I don't know if I'm going to be doing anything over the summer. I mean, probably just hanging locally with the kids, but
sure.
Yeah, it seems so late this year. I mean, we don't break until like mid-July.
Yeah, July 18th.
July 18th.
Yes.
I mean, it's so late. And my youngest son goes back to school on like August 7th.
Right.
So I'm like, well, I don't,
There's not a lot of time
probably
to do
not
things.
going to squeeze anything in there, but it's all good. We'll get to hang out for a few
Well, at least
weeks.
you get a little bit of time at the home front without interruption.
Sure.
So
for sure. Yeah. So looking forward to that. But I did mention this is House of Origin deadline, which is essentially on Friday. Yep. Every bill that was introduced in the Assembly has to be passed out of the Assembly by Friday in order to stay alive for the year. And then every bill, obviously, in the Senate has to do the same for our House of Origin deadline. What are your sort of expectations this week? What are some of the things that you've been following?
Yeah. There are a few exceptions like urgency statutes, but the vast bulk of them have to get done. Last week I said the Senate had to do over the next 4 days because I don't anticipate either house to be here on Friday.
Which I'm thankful for. That's good.
I hope my prediction is correct, but I'm sure everyone's motivated to do so.
Yeah.
They would have to do about 64 bills a day, which is easy. And the Assembly about 110.
Yeah.
And last night when the Assembly adjourned about 8:30, the majority leader announced 226 were done. So easily you can do the remaining 215 bills over 3 days.
In theory.
In theory. Well, of course, all the easy ones are done, so they're all controversial.
We knocked out all the easy ones.
Right.
That's the problem.
Well, and the Senate's got about 175 to do over 3 days, but they too have already gone through all of their non-controversial, the ones we call support, the ones that both the Democratic and Republican caucuses both support. So they're relatively easy and straightforward, not much debate, but you'll have a busy Tuesday, Wednesday, and at least half a day, I'm figuring, on Thursday. But this is easy to get done. Yeah, I've seen far worse.
Well, we actually made a lot of progress last night. So we're recording this early Tuesday morning.
Yes.
But normally we record on a Monday. But Monday we made a lot of progress.
Yeah. And you only had to go to about 8:30. The Senate did just shy of only 80 bills. Starting an hour after you, but they went until 10:30 last night. So.
Yeah, I saw they were still going after I left. That's pretty rough.
I know. Yeah.
So, definitely a lot of progress. That was good.
I would note that some of my colleagues were complaining about the projected 6 or 8 p.m. adjournment all this week. And I said, God, in the old days, they used to go until midnight, 1 in the morning, day after day during House of Origin. So this is easy.
It really does seem a little lighter, right? And I mean, what do you attribute that to? So one thing, and you noted this earlier in the year, we changed the bill limit from 50 bills per 2-year session to 35, which we kind of hoped would reduce the load a little bit, but it really didn't this year in a lot of ways because we introduced like the same amount of bills.
Yeah, 2,350 this year. Roughly average. We will see an impact next year.
Sure.
So assuming every legislator in both houses introduces his or her maximum 35, that will still result in 500 fewer bills, a total of 1,850. So
I'll take it.
We should see some impact. This year we really did not, unfortunately, but that's the way it goes. You asked earlier about what do I attribute the shorter nights. There's definitely far less debate. A decade ago plus, there was a lot more extensive debate on the floors, certainly in committees as well, but definitely on the floors. So it's shortened considerably. Everybody basically knows how they're going to vote. The debate is more for legislators to make a point or two, not necessarily to persuade their colleagues or impact the vote outcome.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking we'll get into a little more debate in the next couple days, just because some of the more controversial stuff will be coming up. But definitely wasn't the case on Monday, too much at least. Last thing before we jump into our stories of the week. So the big thing you're doing this year, or one of the things you're doing this year, doing many things, is on Capitol Weekly, you've got the Micheli Minute and the Micheli Files. I just wanted to ask, and by the way, if anyone wants to check out the Micheli Minute, what is it, once a week?
Once a week.
That you do?
Mondays.
So tell us a little about the Minute and kind of how that came to pass and what it is.
Capitol Weekly came to me about a year and a half ago and said, would you write a regular column on state government, particularly main attention on the legislature, of course, but also write a lot about the executive branch and rulemaking and statutory construction and bill drafting and topics like that. And so I've been doing it every week. I just switched after over a year and a half to I'm going to do every other week.
That makes sense.
Well, at a certain point, you also sort of dry up your. It's hard to come up with original content every week, and they're not, a couple of paragraphs. They're usually pretty lengthy articles. And then last April, just over a year ago, the editors, Tim Foster and Rich Eisen, said, we have this idea, and we want to call it the Micheli Minute. Of course, it turns out that it's got to be about 52, 53 seconds. But when they first approached, they said, we would love for you to cover what happened last week and a preview of what's coming this week.
Gosh.
And I said, oh, okay, so how much time is that? And they said, 1 minute. I said, oh boy. As I was chatting with you before we started taping, my wife did the very first one as a practice run on her iPhone, right? And got through everything. And I said, how did I do? And she said, 1:15. I said, I have to cut 20 seconds?
Not even close.
Not even close. So there are a few weeks where I speak really, really fast to get into those 52 seconds. It is funny.
I watched it last week, and it was just like you were moving through it.
Yeah,
there's a lot to cover. You were trying to cover appropriations, and you're trying to cover,
And then the two rules committees dropped at the end of the week this memo that got an amend deadline for June 23rd and all this stuff. Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So, so if you want to check out the Micheli Minute, it's a really great, again, brief update. You can go to capitalweekly.net, and there's a tab on there for Micheli Minute, I believe.
They post it late Sunday night, but definitely come Monday morning. And so it's there.
And it's also on their YouTube.
Yeah, they put it on YouTube and Instagram, I think, as well. But
so it's good. It's a nice little, very brief, like, hey, this is what's going on in the Capitol. And I think it's
as
good.
you and I were chatting about earlier, it'd be easier for either one of us to pontificate for 5 minutes than one.
Hey, why do you think I do the podcast? I mean, geez, we only do it
There's
every
a lot
other
to be
week, but at
said.
least I get an hour, right?
Exactly.
Or at least
There's a lot to be
minutes.
said on these,
Yeah. So, lots to be said, so listen to this podcast if you want a little more deep dive, but check out the Micheli Minute if you just want the basics, and it is good. It's good to know what's going on. And honestly, that's one of the reasons we started the podcast, is because there's not an overwhelming amount of resources, right, for what's going on in the state capitol.
Yeah.
There's a lot of news for what's going on in the federal government, right?
Right.
Trump administration, or the congressional proceedings, whatever it might be. There's a lot of focus on that.
Yeah.
But, one of my big things, and one of the reasons I got involved in local government and then eventually state government, was there's just a lot of decisions that get made at your state and local level that are so important, right? And,
Absolutely.
And they just don't get near as much attention. So.
Well, as you know, after all these years that we've worked together, I mean, transparency, I think, is critical to a healthy, functioning democracy. And
For sure.
I found, especially during our 2+ years of near lockdown at the state capitol during the COVID-19 pandemic, that the transparency was severely lacking. And so I think at that time, I really started to try to share information and pump stuff out so that
great.
not only my colleagues, but, generally the public was at least had some idea as to what was going on,
For sure.
Behind closed doors. So,
Yeah, no, it's great. Appreciate that you're doing that. And it's always, it's funny how everyone, goes to Chris Micheli too for news stories and all this stuff, right? I know we were just talking about that with Ashley Zavala and a number of other folks. Let's dive in a little bit to the stories of the week this week.
Sure.
So big story at the end of last week was the appropriations hearing, obviously.
Yep.
For those that aren't aware of the appropriations process, if your bill, at least in the assembly, costs over, I believe it's $150,000, you go on to the suspense file. And essentially, well, speaking of transparency, it's not the most transparent process in the world. It's sort of an up or down a decision by the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and the committee kind of runs through these bills really quickly and says your bill is either due pass with amendments, or held on suspense, which means essentially it's dead for the year.
Sure.
And so...
although in this first year of the 2-year session, they've also distinguished a handful of bills that they have called 2-year bills, which will have a chance to be voted upon again in January.
So was that in the hearing itself they did that?
Yes.
Or? Okay. So they did say, this can come back in January.
Yes. The Senate, if I recall my numbers, did about 11 bills that they distinguished as 2-year, and the Assembly Appropriations Committee, 26 of them. The idea being that perhaps during the fall, those authors and proponents and opponents might be able to work something out. And then when you return in January, they'll take a second vote on those measures.
Yep.
And so, of course, 2-year bills get carried over to the second year, but they have to clear their House of Origin by January 31st. So a handful of bills in both committees get a second shot, a second bite at the apple. Yeah.
Yeah. For those that didn't, I mean, it's always appropriations.
You can
is always a tough
reintroduce.
day. You can always reintroduce. Usually don't have a lot of luck if you try to gut and amend something in the Senate, but you can always try that.
Yes.
Like for me, I got 2 of my 4, so I will take a 50% success rate out of Approps.
A 500% batting rate is not
exactly
not bad here.
And so appreciate the bills that my colleague, the chair, Assemblywoman Buffy Wicks, sent through. I know, that's always kind of a fun day for staff and everybody waiting to see. And I will say, so she started the hearing last week by saying, we're in a very difficult budget environment this year. Many good bills are going to fall by the wayside. And so she kind of did this kind of warning, right, to legislators. And I will say the 2 bills that she kind of held back on my side were probably my 2 more costly bills. And then the 2 that she let through were the ones that have less cost. So, that at least in my case, that seemed to be pretty accurate, right? And so...
well, and her counterpart, Senator Ana Caballero, made similar statements at the start of the Senate hearing. It's interesting to note that the Assembly Appropriations Committee basically held the same percentage this year that they did last year. The Senate increased slightly the percentage that they held this year versus last year.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting. Actually, Capitol Weekly put out we'll put a few articles in the notes just with some of the bills that passed, but we don't really have to dive into them too deeply. But a few bills that move forward, a lot of stuff on AI. There was quite a few housing bills that moved forward.
Yep.
Leno's Law, I don't know if you've been following that one at all, moved forward.
It was modified.
It was modified. It would remove the smog check requirements for classic vehicles that are 35 model years or older. And, obviously Jay Leno came to the Capitol.
Yes, he did.
I actually ran into him in the elevator.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Well, he took some fun photographs. I just saw postings.
I didn't ask him for a selfie, but I did say hi real quick.
He took some with Senator Grove in a few old cars. So that's
it was pretty cool. They had a little event down here.
Yeah.
But that was pretty fun to see him.
We've definitely had the last
around.
Couple of years a number of celebrities.
Yeah,
come
been
and pitch bills.
Jay Leno this year, Paris Hilton's been here a lot recently.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a few other folks that we've seen around the halls, but it's kind of fun.
Well, I was told and shared with folks on social media that Assemblymember Lackey's legislative director actually showed me the link that Paris Hilton did a shirt. Legislation is hot.
Actually, you're right.
Yes.
No, I did see
After
this.
coming to
She's
Sacramento and working
a shirt on her website.
Exactly.
Legislation is hot or something like
that. Yes.
Hilarious.
Yes.
I did not buy one.
I haven't yet, but a colleague of mine said that she bought them for her whole office. So
It's a fun little memento, right?
Yes.
If you worked with her on that or whatever.
Well, I didn't realize. So Taylor in Assemblyman Lackey's office explained to me that her saying is apparently "It's so hot."
Something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on
No,
Paris
neither
Hilton.
am I. I'm learning this for the first time from Taylor. So I said, well, then she should actually change the shirt. It should say legislation that's so hot. But it just says legislation is hot.
Yeah. All right.
So,
well, hey, I don't know where to buy that, but I'm sure you can Google it and you can find it.
I think
really
it's on her
website.
Shirt. If there's a Paris Hilton website,
That's so funny. Any Capital insiders that want to buy that, I'm sure it'll sell really well.
I can't wait to see some member of the public or even a lobbyist testifying in committee with one of Paris Hilton's T-shirts on, right? Yeah.
Hey, there's always the Senate, right? They got to do it in the Senate. So maybe Lackey can testify.
There you go. Yeah.
I think that would be good. I'd love to see him in that.
Yes, your colleague could have fun with this. Yeah.
So another big story actually yesterday came out was California Legislature still has no plan to address cost of living and affordability. This was a story put out by Ashley Zavala. I think you're actually in the story as well. But essentially, her write-up is on, 6 months ago, Assembly leadership announced, hey, affordability, cost of living, these are going to be our number one priorities this year.
Yep.
Only, I think, 9 of the 467 bills on the floor have anything kind of related to affordability and cost of living. The Republican caucus has also made this week our cost of living week, where each day we're going to be putting forward a vote, or at least forcing a vote on a bill that we think would actually make things more affordable. Okay. Yesterday, it was, the LCFS tax. There's going to be one on suspending the gas tax. Just different things that are also suspending the increase in the gas tax, which is happening in July, just a month from now. So, we're looking at things like that, but really calling on our colleagues like, hey, if we're really serious about affordability, let's put a plan together. And so I thought, I don't know what she talked to you about, but I thought it was an interesting story that was highlighting an important issue.
Yeah, I mean, both of the legislative leaders, the Assembly Speaker and Senate President Pro Tem, both talked about year of affordability. What I chatted with her about briefly was that there are two sides of that equation. One is a reduction in cost of living, right? Yeah. Perhaps some of the things that you're talking about this week, but also, Democrats and Republicans have talked about reducing the cost of electricity, the cost of gas, the cost of insurance and housing. The Assembly Democrats are putting forth some housing affordability measures, et cetera. But I said the other side of that equation is also some of the bills that are running through the process that would increase the cost of living. And what I mean by that is that there are bills, whether they're environmental regulations, consumer regulations, a number of labor and employment law changes that will increase the cost, at least on businesses or the employer community. And ultimately, those costs get passed along to consumers in the price of goods and services. And so there are also measures making their way through the legislature that will actually increase or decrease affordability, increase the cost of living. So I talked to her about, hey, there are two sides to this affordability equation.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. And, you know, I think that's kind of the challenge is a lot of the bills that are going to increase the cost of living, that might not be the intention, but that is the result, right? And I think raising that awareness with our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, it's like, hey, these are, you know, we understand that you think this is going to be good for the environment, for example, but those costs are going to get passed down to consumers. And so we have to understand that that's a cost driver. Cal Chamber, actually, interestingly, this year, renamed their job killer list, which is kind of this long tradition of bills that you know, would kill jobs, to a list of cost cutters and cost drivers, which I do think reflects where people's priorities are this year. Obviously, we still care about jobs, and that's still really important. Yeah. But a lot of the focus right now is on cost, and so it was interesting to see they highlighted a lot of bills that are going to increase costs in California.
Exactly. I mean, a handful.
And a few that bring them down.
Yeah, a few obviously will reduce costs and are beneficial. Not all of those are moving, but there are still quite a few cost drivers, the new job killer tag. Yeah. Yeah,
I think at the end of the day right now, I still think we're out of balance. I think there's still more cost drivers than cost cutters in terms of what's moving. Yep. The one area I would say where the legislature has taken pretty good action this year is on the housing front. So they have done this fast track housing legislation package. I actually have a bill in that package as well. Bipartisan efforts going on there to really focus in on reducing the cost, not just of housing for consumers, but of reducing the cost of building housing and the review process and things like that, which I think is important.
Well, I think the legislature also has to consider affordability and accessibility of insurance as well, because you can't be a homeowner without insurance.
Excellent
and as
point.
you well know, certainly here in Northern California, we've all heard of folks who had to, drop out of a home purchase contract because they couldn't get affordable insurance. So that goes along with it.
It's a huge problem. Yeah, it really, it's a huge, I think, shock to people that maybe finally get to the point where, hey, we can purchase a home, and then you get hit with that. It's really brutal. Yeah. Definitely need to do more about the insurance market. One big bill that did pass last week before we got into the final week here was a bill to combat anti-Semitism in our schools. Passed with a 68-0 vote. Was very thankful to see that. The bill number, it was AB 715 by Don Addis and Rick Zabur, two members of the Jewish caucus that were very, they started this bill with a focus on ensuring that any ethnic studies curricula in California was not teaching anti-Semitism, was being very fair across the board, and respecting the Jewish community.
Absolutely.
Something that I supported them on in the Assembly Education Committee, and that all the diversity caucuses ultimately came on board with, which I think is a good thing.
Yes.
But I will say that I was shocked how many people, even in the form of this current bill, which was a deal that was struck, there was amendments negotiated, and there were still hundreds of people that showed up in opposition to this bill in the Education Committee. Very sad to see that, but ultimately, I think this is a good step that'll continue to get worked on in the Senate. So.
Yeah, well, any bigotry or discrimination, no matter what form, should have zero tolerance in our society as well as our schools. So I'm glad California legislature is combating it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was good to see kind of everyone speak in support of it and sort of come together on it. So hopeful that continues moving in the right direction in the Senate. Speaking of the Senate, this is a different Senate. This is the United States Senate.
Oh, yes.
Which we're taking a quick detour, we don't do a lot of federal stuff, but this has such a tremendous impact on California. The U.S. Senate voted to block California's electric car mandate in a historic vote. So
after the House had done so.
We're
awaiting the president's signature on these resolutions. Yes.
So this is to send this to the President Trump's desk. So, you know, again, the little context on this, the governor signed an executive order in California that would essentially mandate that gas-powered vehicles are phased out by 2035.
Yep.
This would essentially undo that executive order or take it out of California's ability to change. There obviously are a lot of federal standards when it comes to emissions for obvious reasons, because you can't have different emission standards in every state. But for many, many years, California's received a carve out. And so,
and don't forget, 11 states have followed suit.
And 11 states have followed suit with California as well. Yeah. And so I don't know if you saw the story, wanted to comment briefly on your thoughts of the impact this is going to have.
Well, definitely. Again, we're awaiting the president's signature on these resolutions. You know, to me, this is also not only an interesting policy. You know, for 50 plus years, California has received these waivers from the U.S. EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And clearly a new Republican administration was not going to further allow those waivers. The question in my mind, being the, of course, legislative geek that I profess to be, is whether or not those resolutions under the Congressional Review Act are permissible. And I'm going to side with the Senate parliamentarian and the U.S. GAO that said no. It can't be subject to the resolution. And here's why. It doesn't meet the definition, those waivers, of a regulation under the Federal Administrative Procedure Act. And so I tend to think that it is not subject to a CRA, which can only overturn a properly adopted regulation pursuant to the APA. As you know, the Senate Republican leader, the majority leader, John Thune, did a number of procedural things so that he wasn't directly going against the opinion of the Senate parliamentarian. Because now in the big, beautiful bill, there's a question whether or not a number of the provisions that the House passed are going to be held to be permissible in that bill.
Right.
And those rulings will be made by the Senate parliamentarian. And Senator Thune has made clear that he is not going to overturn the Senate parliamentarian in that regard. So this is a very interesting inside baseball.
Probably something that'll then get worked out in the courts. Is that?
Undoubtedly. Governor Newsom and our Attorney General, Rob Bonta, have already said that once the president signs those two resolutions overturning the waivers from U.S. EPA, that the state of California will file suit. So yes, it'll be a determination by the courts. Now, historically, I would have probably thought that this would be an easy one. But the current makeup of like the U.S. Supreme Court that's been particularly deferential to this administration, I don't know. They might uphold it and say, yes, it is a proper use of the CRA.
It'll be interesting to watch. You know, I'm personally rooting for the bill. I think, you know, it's amazing. Some of the rhetoric that we've heard coming from the left on this was that, you know, what about states' rights? It's like, well, you know, I hate to say it, but it wasn't like this was done democratically. The legislature did not vote on this ban, right, of this 2035 gas-powered vehicle ban. This was done by executive order, something I strongly oppose because I do think it's going to have talk about cost drivers. I mean, this idea that families are going to have to purchase a non-gas-powered vehicle after 2035, when we really don't have the infrastructure yet and do not have the, I think even the vehicle availability yet to or affordability to make that possible. I was very concerned about this executive order. I will say my prediction, and before this bill passed, is that executive order was going to get undone by the next governor anyway.
Interesting.
Just because I don't think it's feasible.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to leave that to chance. So I'll be definitely rooting for this legislation to be upheld from the standpoint of, I think it's going to be really harmful to consumers in California. That being said, I also would note that it got a lot of Democratic support in the House, which, this is being kind of reported
even
as,
from some California Democrats.
Okay, absolutely. I believe Lou Correa voted for
Orange
it
County.
from Orange County.
Several Central Valley Democrats voted for
absolutely.
it.
So, I know it's being reported as a story of like, the Trump administration or even, congressional Republicans kind of fighting back against California, but we had Democrats in California support this bill, this resolution that I think really underlines what they're hearing from their constituents. And it also, by the way, it wasn't just the gas-powered vehicle ban, but also some of the clean truck rules as well.
That's correct, especially medium and heavy-duty trucks, which, today you were talking about infrastructure, the cost and availability of, big trucks is just not there yet. We've really got to figure out what do we do in the transitional period, because we all want to get away from, those diesel trucks. So we've got to look at other options with alternative fuels. In addition to the governor's executive order, obviously setting the 2035 date, don't forget that the legislature also gave CARB significant regulatory authority and, query whether or not entities in the executive branch like CARB and a handful of others maybe need to see some of that regulatory authority curtailed. The only way to do that, of course, is by legislation. So I'll be curious whether or not the legislature, whether under this governor or the next, might rein in some of those regulatory agencies and how much authority that they are able to exercise.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. And actually, I've got another story on CARB in a couple minutes here. Okay. So we'll return to that topic momentarily, but I think that is a really good question and one that, we need to figure out. I'm going to skip down a little bit here so we can move along a little here. Let's see. By the way, in the notes, Cal Matters did a really good write-up on that U.S. Senate vote.
They always do a good job.
They did. It was really thorough on the electric car mandate. So we'll put that in the notes as well if you want to read more about that resolution. I don't know if you heard last week, or a couple weeks ago, Tom Sheehy and I talked about this, but businesses are now seeking to overturn this minimum wage increase that happened in Los Angeles for hotel workers and airport workers.
$30 an hour.
Yeah, they need to get 93,000 signatures, I think, to put this on the ballot. But the Mayor Bass just signed that into law, and so into ordinance or whatever. So that's going to be an interesting fight to watch down there. So $30 an hour.
Well, again, that's another example of just like our current minimum wage. Currently at $16.50, as you know, through legislation. Those in the fast food industry went to $20 an hour last April, just over a year ago. And, a lot of these costs get passed along ultimately to the consumer again in what you pay for, whether it's a hamburger or what you'll pay for in a hotel stay. And don't forget, in Los Angeles, we've got some international events, right? Next summer, World Cup. LA's hosting 8 of the 14 games in California, the other 6 in Santa Clara. And then they've got the Super Bowl in 2027. And then, of course, the Summer Olympics and Paralympics in 2028. If you're paying $30 an hour, you're going to pay a lot more in those hotel stays for those international events.
Yeah, it's incredible. So hopefully that gets worked out before. But you want to talk about a cost driver. I mean, that is going to, I know we keep returning to this theme, but it is going to raise costs dramatically. And in a lot of cases, probably lead to fewer jobs and some of the businesses leaving that area.
Well, and I think the other problem that we've seen, for example, with other increases in the statewide minimum wage, as well as that in the fast food industry, is because those costs get passed along, even though some of those individuals are enjoying the benefits of a higher wage, they're also paying more for some of the things that they are purchasing, whether it's meals, gas, electricity, et cetera. So it's not entirely clear if there's 100% benefit for every wage increase that comes along.
Staying on this topic of affordability, new study ranked all of the least affordable places in the United States. 9 of the 10 were in California.
Are we surprised?
Not a good list you want to be leading, right? But I want a little trivia question for you, because I don't know if you saw the study, but what was the most expensive city to live in terms of housing costs and other things? Would you say that in
was it San Jose?
It's not San Jose.
Okay.
It's actually on the coast.
Okay.
But it is Santa Barbara.
Santa Barbara.
So I think that they took home the
award.
the trophy for most expensive. But
this reminds me. I thought that speaking of Cal Matters, I thought Dan Walters did an interesting column a few weeks back where he said, a lot of folks in the state are touting that we are the 4th largest economy based on gross domestic product. Of course, I was reminded that Japan slipped from 4 to 5 as opposed to us moving from 5 to 4. But nonetheless, we have such a high, well above the national average unemployment. We have the highest homelessness rate, a very high poverty rate in the state. Highest electricity, amongst the highest in corporate and certainly personal income tax rates, et cetera.
Highest gas tax,
So I think that as much as we all like to tout the size and power of our GDP in the state, we also have some significant issues that we have to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, another study of U.S. News and World Report did their best cities to live in the United States or whatever. No California city cracked the top 100, which I thought was interesting. But I do have to give a big shout out to the city where I live, because it was the #1 ranked California city.
Really?
Which was the city of Folsom, ranked 113th.
Okay.
So not too bad.
Not the top 100, but the highest of California cities.
But the highest in California. And in terms of cities to live, so very proud of my city. Folsom,
well, I must say,
best city in California. We're gonna.
There are definitely some beautiful homes there. You have the Palladium and great shopping and restaurants. So
you get the historic district, which is always fun.
It's always a fun place.
I like to visit there quite a bit, but no,
I love to walk those streets of Old Town Folsom.
Also, some of the the best outdoor recreation. We've got one of the biggest bike trail networks, and then trail networks, and then also the wonderful Lake Natoma.
Yes, out on the water.
There. So, by the way, I've been driving the Rainbow Bridge. I drive it all the time. We got the new one and the old one, but you take a look out there on a weekend right now, and it's just nothing but paddle boards.
I was going to say my son loves a paddleboard. Vincent enjoys that. Yeah,
it is definitely that time of year. So. City of Folsom, great place to be. Although, if the people that are listening from Folsom are probably like, don't tell anyone. Stop telling people. This is the best place.
More people will come.
We're already have more and more people moving here every year.
Of course, with your 113th ranking, you have to put an asterisk because you have to say, that sounds bad, but we're number one in California.
Number 1 in California, okay?
Right.
Yeah.
No one broke the 100, so we're number 1 in Folsom.
That's all right. There's a lot of cities. It's fine. I'll take it. I'll take 113.
There you go.
So couple fun ones to close out here, and then I'll play you one more clip, and then we can get you out of here. But rescued California black bear cub being raised by humans dressed as bears in California.
I read that. I did not read the whole story, but I definitely saw the headline.
Oh my goodness! Well, read it. We'll put it in the notes. But they've got what is the It's the San Diego Humane Society's Ramona Wildlife Center.
Okay.
They're trying to get this bear back into the wild, so they want him to recover.
Yeah.
And they were really worried that if he didn't have, I don't know, a normal upbringing, I don't know, like it would harm his transition to the wild. So they literally have people in bear costumes go in there.
Now, what I want to know, are they acting like bears, or are they just in the costume?
Okay, so go to the link in the story, and just there's a photo in this article that I can't show, but I mean, this does not look like a real bear. I mean, that's like, it literally looks like a human in a bear costume.
I was going to say he's just sitting there, or she is sitting there with their
like
back
human,
against the
right?
wall. Yeah.
It's like, so.
Like a human in a bear costume.
We report, you decide. I don't know. It doesn't really look, I'm like, how... I don't know if it helps, great. But it's.
Does your podcast have one of those polls? How many of you think this looks like a bear?
We used to actually do an X poll, right? Some weeks, right? So maybe we'll throw that up on the X.
This could be a poll. Do you think this will work? Yeah.
Is this a convincing bear?
Exactly.
Last fun story here, only because I drink way too many of these. But how a California wine company created the nation's best-selling spirit. So what do you think is the new best-selling, I'll give you a hint, it's a canned spirit.
Well, I thought there were all these vodka-based drinks.
Yeah, you're onto something there. So it's a Gallo product.
Oh, okay.
And
Gallo's in it.
It is the High Noon.
The High Noon,
the High Noon.
Okay.
So it is now the...
I did not realize that was a Gallo product.
It is, yeah. Gallo was really the first to come up with this.
Thule, High Noon,
Yeah, and now they have the Neutral, which is an Anheuser-Busch product, which I love Gallo. I love High Noons. I'm slightly partial to the Neutral. They're a little less sweet, but both fantastic products. And
with 3 kids who are young adults, they are... they usually have those at home as opposed to wine or other.
And it's brilliant for Gallo because I will say, they say that, Gen Z and some of these, they're not drinking as much wine anymore, right?
Exactly,
so to be able to come out with a product that still can, appeal to that generation.
Absolutely.
I'm the same way. My wife drinks wine, but I just kind of moved away from the beer and wine just because of the caloric sort of impact to my life, right? You can grab one of these.
So you're doing it for
seltzers
non-taste, but dietary purposes?
I mean, also taste, but but also dietary. I mean, you can grab a can of this for 100 calories. I'll take that all day. It's like, I guess you could do that with the Coors Light too. But
well, that might be a better alternative for me because yesterday a colleague, it was like 6 o'clock at night and hadn't eaten since lunch, and he had an extra cookie, a snickerdoodle. And I was about 3/4. Well, yes. How do you pass that up? Of course, I didn't pass it up. But when I was about 3/4 of the way through, he said, "That's 430 calories."
Oh my God!
I don't know what they put in that snickerdoodle.
Well,
it did taste very good.
Steps this week, though, right?
Yeah.
So
I don't know. We're standing around quite a bit in the rotunda.
Yesterday, I had some colleagues just doing laps around the assembly floor.
Oh God, that's great. That's what I should do around the rotunda.
This is a thing that is happening.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember who started this, but there's quite a few of my colleagues, are doing the laps.
That's great.
And then some of the staff too.
The
floor staff.
I should try that on the in the rotunda. Yeah,
it's probably good.
Yeah, instead of standing. Yeah.
All right. So last thing here, couple minutes left. I'm going to play you our clip of the week. It is related to the CARB situation. The hearings. There was an oversight hearing on CARB last week that was. Talking about the gas prices and the impacts that are being had on CARB regulations specifically. I'll play you this clip, and then we'll get your thoughts briefly.
A live look over the state capitol right now, where Governor Gavin Newsom's administration was in the hot seat today as California is set to lose 2 oil refineries within the next year. Those closures will come after the governor and his administration pushed and successfully passed new regulations on the oil industry within the last few years.
Now, lawmakers are now worried how this is going to impact California drivers and their cost of living. Case Area 3 Capitol correspondent Ashley Zavala takes a closer look at what could be next.
Governor Gavin Newsom's top administration officials in the hot seat today over California's situation with oil refiners and potential rising gas prices. Democratic lawmakers signaling they may be losing trust with some of these agencies.
I know that what climate leadership does not look like, and that is $10 gas. You have a presentation.
California's clean air push facing pushback from both political parties. Lawmakers worry state regulators have kept drivers, workers, and Californians overall as an afterthought as 2 oil refiners prepare to shut down within the next year. Those 2 account for about 20% of the state's oil refining capacity.
We're talking about a plan when these companies leave and what happens to the land. I'm concerned about what happened to the people.
Lawmakers grilled the leaders of the state agencies that regulate the oil and gas industry, including California Air Resources Board Chair Leanne Randolph, Vice Chairman of the California Energy Commission Siva Gunda, and the Department of Petroleum Market Oversight Director Ty Milder.
We have a crisis on our hand that may have been self-created by the actions that perhaps have been taken by the state, by regulators.
Democratic Assemblyman David Alvarez and others frustrated after they were swayed to approve some of the latest regulations put on the oil and gas industry.
I think I also heard you say that another closure can lead to a significant increase in cost to consumers on the price of gas.
Yes, sir.
Gunda told lawmakers California will likely need to have oil imported from other parts of the world by ships.
So we really have only one choice there today, which is, increasing imports. Based on our work right now, that will be very tight for the North.
Increase in imports, which means that you have more vessels who, what I've heard also, if you increase the vessels, that means more emissions because we don't control those vessels and the emissions in which they bring. Is that correct?
You are correct that additional marine traffic would implicate air quality issues beyond state waters that we do not regulate.
Now, this was just an informational hearing, so no action was taken. It's unclear exactly what the next steps will be, but Governor Newsom's administration is still apparently trying to come up with a plan to deal with those 2 upcoming refinery closures.
We'll stop it there, but just finishing up here, but briefly your thoughts. Obviously, one thing I wanted to point out was that all of the comments in this piece were Democrats, which I thought was really interesting, and actually I'm glad to see, because I think new studies came out recently, could be facing up to over $8 gallon gas potentially if certain regulations take place, certain refineries close. I mean, there's a lot of things that are driving that cost up. What was your thoughts if you saw this hearing at all?
Yeah, I saw bits and pieces of it, and certainly the news afterwards, including Dr. Jasmeet Bains, a Democrat from the Central Valley, actually is calling for the resignation of the CARB board chair. Well, first of all, great reporting by KCRA's Ashley Zavala, and like you said, those were all Democratic legislators, primarily from Southern California, who sit on that committee, and noted that what is transpiring is potentially going to substantially increase the cost of gasoline. And once again, in this year of affordability, I think they're feeling those concerns and the pressure about how do we reduce those costs, because the actions that are being taken, certainly at a regulatory level, are not going to do anything to decrease the cost of gasoline. They're only going to increase it. God forbid if it gets to $8 a gallon. I mean, honestly, I think that, people could lose their seats in office if it reaches that sort of level.
Absolutely.
So I think the legislature is going to have to clamp down, and this goes to my comments earlier in your show, in which I said perhaps it's time for the legislature to revisit the grant of regulatory authority and how broad it is that's been given to CARB. And there are undoubtedly a handful of other executive branch agencies and departments out there that need to revisit that as well. Your colleague, Assemblymember Blanca Pacheco, has a new select committee that's going to look at regulatory authority and whether or not the legislature should revisit some of those statutory grants. Every agency and department has to have some rulemaking authority, but maybe a few of them have to be reined back in.
Yeah, it's and I support that work. I think we absolutely have ceded far too much authority to unelected bureaucrats and regulators. Interestingly, in that hearing, Leanne Randolph, the chair of the California
CARB.
Air Resources
Yeah.
Board, CARB, made some comment that that CARB does not analyze how its clean air rules impact costs to drivers and consumers. That's what ultimately led to my Democratic colleague Jasmeet Bains for calling for her resignation. Because that's absolutely, a dereliction of duty. It's something that we have to be doing as a state. And so, we'll see. I think the bipartisan voices on this are really interesting.
Well, just on that last note, I've certainly been one over the years who has railed against the lack of due consideration by regulatory agencies in terms of cost implications. In our State Administrative Procedure Act, which basically governs how these executive branch entities adopt these regulations, there are requirements today that they are supposed to comply with that are to examine the true fiscal impact.
Yeah.
And a colleague of mine noted this, which is everything's speculative on the potential cost increases, but everything's very clear in terms of clean air benefits, health benefits, consumer benefits.
That's a great point.
And your colleague, Ana Marie Avila Farias, a new member, had a great bill that was unfortunately held on suspense due to potential cost implications for these agencies and the Office of Administrative Law. But it was specifically to require consumer impact evaluation on regulations. Now, it didn't happen this year, but I'm really hopeful that next year the legislature will push that through and get it enacted, because I think ultimately these rulemaking agencies and departments really have to examine the true cost implications on consumers.
That is a great way to end the show. I could not agree with you more. We will wrap it up there, and I look forward to that work continuing next year, and I hope that bill can move forward in the future. Next episode, we're going to have Stan Ellis, a new Assembly member on the show.
Yeah.
This is our second try at getting him on, so hopefully he comes this
Great
time.
new member.
Great new member, very smart guy. If you want to share ideas for future shows, you can email pointoforderpod@gmail.com. Listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can follow us on socials at Point of Order Pod, and you can follow today's hosts on X, myself at Joshua_Hoover, and then Chris at Chris Micheli. Micheli spelled Micheli.
Thank you.
Chris, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Assemblyman.
And
always enjoy it.
Yeah, would love to have you back down the road, but best of luck with House of Origin this week.
And to you, sir.
All right, see you later.